And so these two concepts of truth and justice, I believe for us, it is helpful to reframe those. When we think about the concept of justice, a lot of times, and one of the things that came up is that we think about consequences, right? We think of justice as being consequences for wrongdoing, right? Like we get justice. We expect the criminal justice system to provide a correction for those people who have created harm, right? Like we think of consequences and punishment as a form of justice. What we don't often realize, and this is where I want to reframe how you think about this concept, not only for us to be able to analyze literature, but to really empower you in your life to protect yourself and to live in healthy relationships and understandings with other people, is that justice is also personal, right? Have any of you heard of the concept of restorative justice? I'm going to put this in the chat. Have you heard of restorative justice? Think you've heard of it? Like you've heard of it, but you're like, I don't really know. Okay, fair enough. What else? Any virtual people? Have you heard of restorative justice? Nope, not vigilante justice, although that does make for amazing movies, John Wick. However, restorative justice, like what does it mean to restore something? What does that mean? Okay, to bring back, right? Back to the original, put it back together. Absolutely, right? To take something that's damaged or neglected or broken and then to care for it in a way that it has been restored, it's been brought back, it's been renewed in a sense, right? So one of the things that we associate with justice is the court system, right? And looking at statistics, what you'll find is that not everybody gets justice, right? What Hop just said, to repair something after it has been harmed, is restorative justice used in court? A question by Feely. That's a good question. There are courts that are starting to use that. There are schools and districts that instead of sending kids to detention and punishing them and things like that, restorative justice attempts to repair or restore what was broken in the relationship, right? So let's talk about this from a personal perspective, right? So and what I'm getting at here, what I want you to know about this is that this is not just a broad concept. This is something that can improve the quality of your life and relationships, right? So this is like real world type advice and reframing our thinking. Number one, consequences when harm is done aren't very effective, right? Like the death penalty is not a very effective deterrent for people committing capital crimes, right? People still do it, right? Laws exist not for the people who break the laws, but laws exist for law-abiding citizens to know what the healthy boundaries are, right? Because people who want to operate, externally from the law are going to do that, right? If people want to break the law, if a 10-year-old wants to smoke cigarettes, they're probably going to find a way, right? And so this idea of justice only being served through consequences is a very ineffective way to think about repairing or restoring relationships after harm has been done. Yes, right, Felix, that's a good assumption that the person who committed the crime fixes the bond between themselves and the victim. Right now, that's obviously, that seems very radical. That seems very radical that someone who's been harmed or has had a crime committed against them would sit down with the person who committed the crime in like a mediated situation. We think, oh my gosh, if something were to happen to me, if like someone had murdered my mom or if someone had raped my sister, I would never want to sit down with that person, right? Like we have very strong and very emotional attitudes about what we think we could do or handle or how we'd respond in the case of harm being done to us or people that we love. But the idea of restorative justice actually puts the burden for the healing back on the person who created the harm, right? So think about it like this. You will live the rest of your life and never escape from the fact that you are going to hurt people and people are going to hurt you. No matter how good you are, no matter how nice you are, no matter what you mean or you intend, you are going to hurt people. It's just part of being a human and being in relation. We're not perfect. We do things out of selfishness and self-interest, and that ends up harming other people, right? As a parent, that hurts my kids when I do things that are focused more on my interests and my selfishness versus what their needs are, right? Same thing in a marriage, same thing in any relationship that you have with your parents, relationship that you have with siblings, relationship that you have with each other as friends or as students, relationship that I have with you between teacher and student. When we think about restorative justice, I want you to consider the idea that the only antidote for pain is pain. I want you to think about this. The only way to get out of pain is to enter into the pain that we have, right? And that is uncomfortable, right? Here's what it looks like, right? If I say something careless or I'm having a bad day or something like that, and I take it out on my wife when I get home and she asks, how was your day? And I like kind of snap at her, you know, and take it out on her, right? And then she says, hey, that hurt my feelings. Right? If my response in that situation, when she tells me that I have hurt her emotionally, is just to say, well, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean to do that. Do you think that a person feels like cared for if we respond like that? Right? Like, absolutely not. Like when people tell you what their intent was and ignore the impact on you, you don't feel closer to that person, you feel more angry, right? And it has taken me a long time to learn this. It has taken me years of therapy and stuff like that. But what I'll tell you is that if you can learn to do this in your interpersonal relationships, you are going to set yourself up for more health and more in your relationships and less toxicity, right? Here's how that looks, right? So I've been careless. I've had a bad day. It's not my wife's fault, but I take it out on her and she says, hey, you hurt my feelings when you said that. If I have the humility to stop in that moment, recognizing that I care for and love my wife very much and am saddened and like affected emotionally that I've hurt her, right? And I say, that was not my intent, but I can tell that that was my impact. Tell me more about how I hurt you. How did I hurt you? And giving her the opportunity, giving the other person the opportunity to share the ways in which they were hurt allows this kind of introduction into restoration because I've entered the pain that I caused, right? The way to remove pain and the way to heal damage in relationships is to offer to carry the burden of harm that you have caused, right? If I create pain, it is an immature attitude for me to simply say or to believe that that person's pain that I caused is solely their responsibility. You want to be healed from the pain that I caused you, then you need to go do that. Is that going to work? Is someone going to get healing in our relationship, in my relationship with them, if I dismiss the pain that I caused and refuse to take responsibility for healing it? Will that work? I think you know the answer. The answer is no, it will not work, right? And that embeds a cycle of toxicity in our relationships when we refuse to take responsibility for the harm that we cause to other people, right? They'll never get healed from our pain. We will never get healed from our pain. And we will never restore our relationship to a place of health and benefit for both people, right? We have to be willing, when we create pain, we have to be willing to own it and to take responsibility for it. And we do that by asking the person more about how we harm them and recognizing that our intents don't matter. It is our impacts that matter, right? If we do not take responsibility for the ways in which we harm people, they will never fully get healed from the harm that we've caused. They'll spend the rest of their life, and you will spend the rest of your life carrying around these like kind of bleeding wounds emotionally, and you're going to bleed all over people who never cut you. This idea of justice and restoration is what creates wholeness as a result of conflict. Being able to enter the pain that we've caused and being able to right that by removing the burden, by taking responsibility for how we've caused harm. What's interesting about this is that justice doesn't operate without truth. Being true to ourselves and being true to other people, right? Or being true with them or speaking truth, right? If I cannot be honest with myself and humble enough in myself to recognize where and how I caused harm, or to ask for someone to show me or tell me how I caused them harm or pain, if I'm not willing to face the truth that I have responsibility in that situation, then there's no way that truth can ever heal or repair the damage. Truth can't do this. Truth can't carry out justice by itself. And justice cannot carry truth out by itself. They are interwoven. They are interlocked. You cannot separate them, right? In order for us to realize the ways in which truth in relationship and truth for our identity are significant, we've got to be willing to face the places where we create conflict, where we create pain, whether we mean to or not, right? It doesn't matter what you meant to do. It matters what you did, right? This is a really difficult concept to teach as a parent, right? And so, quite honestly, my two boys, I want them to be men who understand their emotions and who can access those in healthy ways, and who can admit mistakes and heal damage that they cause, right? And be healed from damage that has been caused to them, right? Here's what that looks like in a very practical situation. The other day, we were at home. My son Isaiah said something that came across as really disrespectful to my wife, right? And I stopped him right there, and I said, "Hey, what you just said was disrespectful to your mother." And he goes, "Well, I didn't mean it." "Well, I didn't mean to." "Okay. while that might be true, can I see his internal motivations? No. He might not have meant it, but when we dismiss people's pain by telling them that we didn't mean it that way, it puts the blame on them for being hurt because that's how they took it. Does that make sense? If we do that, we're making the victims responsible for the pain that we caused them. We're putting it back on them. And number one, that's not fair. And number two, that's not right. And number three, that's not justice, right? So in this situation, I said, okay, that's not your intent, but that was the impact, right? And my wife was there, and I asked her, I said, will you tell Isaiah how that comment made you feel? And she said, disrespected. I felt disrespected when you said that. And when he knows what pain he's caused, he can have a better opportunity to repair that relationship and to take responsibility for why I said that and how I need to make that right, how I need to fix or repair or restore that part of the relationship that I caused with my carelessness, right? I would encourage you and I'd challenge you, when someone tells you that you've hurt them, I would challenge you to not say, I didn't mean to do that, right? Because when we deny our impact on other people in the interest of trying to protect our intentions, what we end up doing again is we end up blaming them for how they took the pain that we caused and put that back on them, and we force them to deal with something that is really ours to own, right? So this idea of restorative justice in relationships, I wish that this could work in like the court system. I think that people facing the humanity of the damage that they cause other people would be a much better way to function as a healthy community and society, right? But our justice system is more focused, the justice that our system is more focused on has to do with punishment rather than restoration, right? It has more to do with punishing the consequences of the impact as opposed to understanding the roots for or the motivations for those actions, right? Not saying it's easy. These are literally some of the hardest conversations that I've ever had to have in my whole life, but I'll tell you this, these types of conversations have saved my marriage in real life like 3 times. Right? Like if I hadn't learned a long time ago through a lot of therapy and a lot of really difficult things and big mistakes that I made, right? Like I really do acknowledge and believe that I would not have the people in my life today that I do and the strength of those relationships that I do if I hadn't learned how to take responsibility for the pain that I cause other people, right? And that's a really difficult conversation to have, right? That sucks. When you sit down with someone and they're like, and you ask them to tell you how you hurt them, and then they start like, here's all the ways that you hurt me, jerk, right? Like that feels bad, right? Like we don't like that feeling, right? What we want to do is we want to be able to move away from that without consequences and with impunity. And that's just not the way that relationships work. Our presence with another person in relationship changes and impacts them, right? Good or bad, right? And we can't control how people react to what we do, but we can absolutely control how we respond, right? Like we can't control other people, but we do have some control over ourselves and whether or not and how we take responsibility, right? And that becomes a really, really important thing. One of the things that I want to make clear here is that this is connected to literature in a lot of different ways because literature exists for the purpose of connecting with people across culture, across time, across space, right? Literature exists to connect us to the experiences of other people. In that way, reading is actually like entering a relationship with the person who wrote it. and with the characters that they are creating. Because we relate to characters, we connect to characters and authors who develop ideas, situations, relationships, worlds that we can also connect to, right? And for us, looking at the Dying Art of Disagreement, which focuses a lot on this concept of truth, the Allegory of the Cave, which focuses quite a bit on how we perceive our surroundings, what things shape our opinions, beliefs, responses, and what we believe to be true based on what we can see. And then the Apology of Socrates, which we can tell through reading that the defense of wisdom and knowledge is based on an admission of shortcoming and based on an admission of ignorance, right? Which is a fascinating irony. But all of these three texts connect to these two ideas of truth and justice in really broad, really important ways, in ways that we can connect to them as well. And that's why I wanted to spend some time talking about truth and justice, is that I want you to understand that justice is not just consequences. It's not just punishment for people who break laws and who do things that are bad, right? Justice is a way, living our life with justice means taking responsibility for the ways in which we cause harm, being clear with people when they harm us, so that they have the ability to repair and we restore the relationship, right? And that honestly is one of the most empowering things you could ever learn, that you can take forever into every relationship that you have. And knowing how to do that is going to literally change your life, because it's not going to put the stress of the harm and dealing with the harm on you, right? It's going to create an avenue and a space where you can process the burden of harm with the person who caused it. And if people aren't willing to do that, then they're probably just going to be a toxic relationship in your life. And so those are things that I would definitely recommend that you consider. And then more specifically, I would encourage you to consider truth and justice as you read The Dying Art of Disagreement. If you haven't read that yet, please do. Please read The Dying Art of Disagreement. We're about to start on advisory. I'm going to stop the recording, but I want you to consider how truth and how justice become important for us as students, for us as people and as citizens who are trying to decide what type of world we want to live in and how to make it so. All right. Hope that was helpful for you.